An elderly man named Patrick sits alone late at night in his trailer, listening to the radio with a small glass of liquor on the table. A romantic song plays, triggering memories of a young woman who had once peered into his car through the rain outside his trailer. The sound of thunder rumbles and a heavy downpour begins echoing the scene in his thoughts. Patrick looks at a vial of clear liquid, but decides against it, setting it aside. Suddenly, a loud knock interrupts his thoughts. He nervously glances toward the door and tells the person to go away, but the knocking persists. A woman's voice calls out, pleading to be let in. After a moment's hesitation, Patrick opens the door and finds a soaking wet young woman asking for a ride into town. Her car is parked outside. Patrick glances around his kitchen and steps aside to let her in. She hesitates but accepts, stepping inside, though she refuses the towel he offers, saying she only needs to get to town. Patrick asks her what brought her here so late, but she only says she was running. Patrick tells her his car is broken, and there's no way he can help her, especially since buses don't run at this time. He apologizes for not opening the door earlier, explaining that local kids often prank him by knocking and running off. The woman notices the glass on his table, and Patrick suggests she take off her wet sweater to dry, though she insists she won't stay long and asks to use the phone. Patrick seems to ignore her request, instead expressing surprise at her claim of swimming at the beach, considering her muddy bare feet. The beach is miles away. He invites her to sit, noting she looks like she needs rest. Hesitantly, she accepts the invitation. Patrick offers her tea, but she declines, preferring a cigarette, which he doesn't have. As Patrick sets the tea down in front of her, she asks again to call a taxi, explaining that she's staying nearby but doesn't want to walk in the rain. Patrick quickly realizes she isn't from around here, since swimming season ended months ago and storms like this only happen in the summer. He offers her alcohol instead, but she continues to press for a phone. He hands her some coins, explaining he doesn't have a mobile, and she got to use the payphone, which is located beyond the park gates, locked at night. He also mentions that the locals are a fearful bunch just like him. The woman thanks him and begins to leave, not wanting to trouble him further, but Patrick points out that she'll have to wait for the park to reopen. She reluctantly agrees to stay, sitting to let her clothes dry. As she stands, she begins to look around, asking questions which Patrick answers thoughtfully. He tells her he grew up by the coast and moved to the city in his 20s. While exploring, she finds some feminine items on a dresser, picking up a small watch. She admits she's also unemployed and feels constantly unlucky, something Patrick can relate to. However, he disagrees with her, sharing that he worked as an electrician until a shocking accident with a light socket forced him to quit. After such an intense experience, routine work no longer appealed to him. He muses about how people are drawn to danger, seeking thrills through risky activities like skydiving. Meanwhile, the woman picks up a locket containing a lock of hair. Patrick continues his musings on the human attraction to danger before asking where she's staying. The woman gives vague responses, raising Patrick's suspicions. She also claims she's never been here before, though he finds her face strangely familiar. Taking the locket from her, he suggests she take a shower to warm up. Noticing her shivering, the woman reluctantly agrees and heads toward the bathroom. Behind the closed door, still cautious of Patrick, she studies her reflection in the mirror, adjusting an earring. After a moment, she steps into the shower, and as the water runs over her, she notices with growing panic that it's turning muddy and mixed with streaks of blood swirling down the drain. Her heart races. She hears a knock at the door as Patrick calls out, bringing her a towel. The water clears, and when she peeks out from behind the curtain, she sees the towel hanging on the door. In the mirror, her forehead is perfectly clean, no sign of injury. Meanwhile, Patrick is heating soup on the stove. He offers her a dry sweater, mentioning it once belonged to an ex-girlfriend, but reassures her that he's single and that she can keep the sweater. The woman admits that she's on her own, struggling to take care of herself, which is why she doesn't turn to family. She describes herself as independent, someone who's drawn to danger only to regret it afterward. Patrick, pouring thick red soup into a bowl, is surprised by her self-awareness. Most women, he says, blame others for their mistakes. She suddenly sighs, lamenting agreeing to stay late at work to lock the gates. This statement catches Patrick's attention, especially when he notices her earring. She moves to the couch with the soup, but doesn't touch it. Instead, she asks about Patrick's nighttime habits. He admits to struggling with insomnia and explaining that aging brings restless nights full of nightmares, unlike childhood, when sleep came easily even after scary cartoons. As he washes the pot, he watches the water turn red and thick like blood. Patrick reflects on how nightmares blur with reality, filling the mind with fear, making one long to disappear or return to innocent dreams. A flash of lightning lights up the sky, and the woman suddenly questions how she got in if the park gates were locked. Patrick, too, seems puzzled. Just then, another knock sounds at the door, and he asks the woman if she might have told anyone where she was going. She looks confused, insisting she didn't tell anyone. Patrick opens the door, but no one is there. Rain pours heavily outside, and the wind howls as thunder crashes. He explains that the kids from the trailer park like to tease him, knocking on his door and running off. The woman notices his boots by the couch and, in a strange moment of panic, pours her soup into them. Suddenly, the power goes out, plunging the trailer into darkness. Patrick grabs a flashlight and scans the ceiling, suspecting that someone might be walking above them. He guesses a tree might have fallen on the power lines, meaning she'll have to stay longer. He's reluctant to check outside, though, as he's still wearing the soup-filled boots. The woman feels awkward, admitting that her mind had been running wild with scary thoughts and now feels embarrassed. Patrick reassures her that she's free to leave at any time. Patrick heads to check the circuit breakers, and the woman follows, using the flashlight to light the way. As he opens the relay box, he shares a childhood story about how he used to be terrified of his father during power outages. The woman glances down at a toolbox and notices something disturbing: blood on a hammer. But when she shines the flashlight directly on it, the hammer appears clean and dry. She then notices bleeding scratches on Patrick's back and offers to fetch first aid supplies to treat them. In the bathroom, the woman digs through the cabinet, finding a vial containing her missing earring among some women's accessories. Terrified, she tries to place it back but fumbles, accidentally dropping it down the drain. As a chill runs through her, she senses someone lying behind the shower curtain. Overcome with fear, she pulls it back only to find an empty tub. Meanwhile, Patrick drifts into a memory of a wrenching car accident. The woman returns from the bathroom, announcing she's leaving. Patrick attempts to persuade her to stay, suggesting they wait out the storm and play cards. He admits he only knows one game. I doubt it. The woman, however, insists on knowing why he has her earring. Offended, Patrick accuses her of snooping where she shouldn't. She insists she's only trying to understand what's happening, and now more determined, says she's leaving. She demands the key to leave. Confused, Patrick asks what scared her so much, questioning what he did wrong. He had let her in, offered warmth and even drinks, yet she was accusing him. He sighs, lamenting that women always burst into his life only to tear it apart. What's she even doing here? He mutters. The woman shouts for the key, but Patrick calmly tells her the door is unlocked. She tries the door and finds it open, embarrassed by her earlier outburst. She decides to stay. Patrick deals the cards for I doubt it, joking that she could pour alcohol into his sneakers if she wanted. For the first time, the woman smiles. Patrick continues to wonder where he's seen her before. The woman suggests that as people age, all the women they've known start to look alike, similar in their struggles, all running from something. As they play, Patrick shares humorous stories about his neighbors near the park entrance, and the woman admits she's been hiding from reality and her own flaws. She confesses she was drinking at a bar before the storm started. Patrick remembers her mentioning the beach, but in the spirit of the game, says he doesn't believe her. He then admits he lied about the sweater. He tells her about meeting his late wife at a gas station, where she asked him to buy her a bag of chips. At first, he thought she was homeless, but she was well-dressed with beautifully clean hair. He bought her the chips, and they sat together eating in silence. She later died of an overdose. Since then, no one had visited his home for a long time. He tells the woman that her presence makes him feel alive, and he pours more into her glass. But as she lifts it to her lips, she notices a lipstick stain on the rim, reigniting her suspicions. The storm intensifies, and Patrick steps outside. Suddenly, the woman hears a phone vibrating. She follows the sound to a back room and discovers a phone on the bed, next to the lifeless body of a woman covered in sheets. Terrified, she tries to hide and plans to escape through a small window in the storage room, intending to smash it with a hammer she previously thought was covered in blood. But when she picks up the hammer, it appears bloodied again. Realizing her only option is the door, she steps out of the storage room and runs straight into Patrick, who captures her, tying her up. He forces her mouth open and makes her drink a mysterious liquid. Struggling, she's dragged to the bedroom, where Patrick throws her onto the bed next to the dead woman. As she desperately tries to free her hands and escape through the small window, Patrick begins to monologue about the woman lying there, how she asked for chips and willingly got into his car. As for the current woman, he questions what she expected, showing up at a stranger's home in the middle of the night. Fate, he says, has nothing to do with it. It's all about choices. The woman feels herself slipping into unconsciousness. Patrick confesses that he gave her a lethal substance, one that will soon bring about her death. He recalls the first woman he killed, who approached him during a storm on the beach asking for a ride. He remembers the tattoo on her ribs, though her face has faded from his memory over time. He believes that tonight's his lucky night. 2 kittles in one evening, and no one will ever know. To him, sin is a myth, as is the concept of God. What remains is a conscience that can be ignored. As the woman loses consciousness, Patrick covers her face and waits for her to die. In his mind, the stormy beach scene plays again. But then he notices a tattoo on her chest, and horror fills him as he realizes with mounting dread that she's the same woman he killed years ago. He plunges into a nightmare, confronted by the ghosts of all the women he has murdered. They fill his house, drinking, bathing, and laughing at him. Darkness envelops him, and the haunting sound of his father's ventilator fills the air, a sound that terrorized him as a child. In the darkness, drenched in blood and despair, Patrick is surrounded by his victims. The police knock at the door, their sound growing louder. His most recent victim steps out of the shadows, forcing him to drink the contents of the vial. The other women jeer at him, driving him toward madness. Suddenly, it all fades. Patrick opens his eyes and finds there's no storm, no woman. Everything was just a hallucination. He hears the knock again. This time, when he opens the door, he sees kids running away, laughing. He pulls an empty vial from his pocket and laughs bitterly, realizing that in his delirium, he drank the solution himself. Inside, he locks the door behind him. Moments later, a thud echoes through the trailer, the sound of his body hitting the floor.